Marina, I think you've forgotten who you work for. Celeste Rowan's voice came through my phone so polished it almost hid the insult. Almost. I was standing in the courtyard of a small hotel in Tuscany with the Bellini signing folder still in my hand. Final notes. Delivery sequence. Margin adjustments. The last clean version of a deal I had spent 13 days keeping alive after Belmar had nearly bruised it to death with late changes in executive vanity. I work for Belmar. I said, no. She said, you work for people who can replace you. That was the moment the air changed. A waiter crossed behind me carrying empty glasses. Somewhere beyond the gate, a scooter rattled past. The world stayed ordinary while a woman 3,000 miles away decided to turn a live cross-border deal into a lesson about power. My name is Marina Vale. I'm 46 years old, and by then, I knew the difference between pressure and humiliation. Pressure comes with a deadline. Humiliation comes with a voice that wants to hear you break. This trip has gone on long enough. Celeste said. You've been acting like this deal belongs to you. It belongs to the company. I said, Monday is the final signing, and you won't be there. I said nothing. You needed a reminder about your position. She said. You are not the face of this company. Then she removed me. No meeting, no transition call, no discussion about continuity. Just a clean little act of force dropped into the most fragile stage of a negotiation she did not understand. I kept my voice even. Thank you for letting me know. That seemed to annoy her more than if I had cried. The line went dead. 4 minutes later, Nadia in HR emailed me. Effective immediately, I was being removed from the Bellini account pending internal review. Trevor Sloan would assume coverage for Monday's signing. I read that twice. Trevor had never sat across from Enzo Bellini. He did not know which concessions had already cost that family more pride than price. He did not know which line in that folder had been softened to keep Monday alive. I looked at the date on my phone. The signing was still set for Monday morning. They thought they had removed one difficult woman from a trip. What they had really done was pull the only steady hand out of a deal that was still being held together by memory, trust, and one final clean draft. And when Monday came, Belmar was going to learn the difference, as always, on her fear. This story is a work of fiction written by the channel's author to reflect familiar human truths, not any real individual. People like Celeste think value should be visible. A title, a signature, a seat at the table, the right face in the room when the cameras come out. What I did for Belmar never looked like that. I was the person who knew which promise had already been stretched too far, which shipment could move faster without risking quality, and which sentence would offend Bellini before anyone in New York even noticed it. That was why the Bellinis trusted me, not because I was charming. Not because I carried the biggest title. Because I told them the truth. If production could meet a timeline, I said yes. If it could not, I said no before someone got trapped inside a polished lie. Belmar had spent months bruising that relationship before I arrived. Late changes, sudden demands, the kind of elegant disrespect companies call efficiency when they aim it at people overseas. I spent 13 days undoing that damage, one careful conversation at a time. And Celeste kept trying to force herself into the final stage. Move the timeline for the weekend show. Tighten the wording so it sounded more executive. Put her name on the confirmation chain, her chair in the signing room, and her approval where it had never been needed before. Small changes on paper. That was the danger. Real deals rarely collapse from one loud mistake. They get weakened by vanity no one wants to challenge. I pushed back every time. Don't make her feel shut out. Nadia warned me the day before the call. I knew what that meant. Keep the work clean. Keep the CEO's wife happy. Keep swallowing what should have been said out loud. I had done that for years. Maybe that was why Celeste thought I would do it one more time. They saw me as the woman standing between a few emails and a plane ticket. They never understood I was holding the concession map, the trust, and the only version of Monday that still had a chance of closing. By Friday morning, they were already trying to make me look temporary. Nadia called first. Her voice had that careful HR softness people use when they want to sound humane while carrying someone else's knife. There's been a transition on the deal team, she said. Julian is putting in temporary coverage so nothing loses momentum. Temporary coverage. That was one way to describe replacing the person who had spent 13 days rebuilding trust with a supplier Belmar had already pushed too far. The replacement was Trevor Sloan. 34, sourcing strategy, smooth voice, clean posture, expensive restraint. He was the kind of man who looked prepared for a board presentation at all times. He knew cost structure, approval flow, and how to sound confident in rooms that rewarded it. What he did not know was Bellini history. Not the real history. Not which concession Enzo had already made once and would not make again. Not which phrases had offended the family months earlier. Not which line in the current draft had only been accepted because I had softened it over 3 separate conversations. Celeste, of course, thought none of that mattered. To her, Trevor was proof. Proof that I had overstated my importance. Proof that any polished man with the right title and a weekend flight could step into Tuscany and finish what I had started. So Trevor got his orders. Fly Friday night. Meet Bellini over the weekend. Keep Monday on schedule. He also got a revised draft. Celeste had changed just enough to make the damage look professional. Approval language tightened. Delivery wording hardened. One line now pushed final discretion back toward New York instead of leaving it where Bellini had already agreed it belonged. It was the kind of edit executives call stronger right before the other side stops trusting them. Julian approved it because men like him believe movement is the same as control. If the process kept moving, he assumed the deal was still alive. I did not argue. I did not send a warning they could later call emotional. I sent one clean email to the Bellini office. As of Thursday evening, I was no longer authorized to represent Belmar in this transaction. For continuity and record purposes, attached is the last approved draft reviewed with my office. By Friday night, they had a new man, a revised draft, and a rescue plan that looked excellent on paper. What they did not have was the trust required to carry any of it into that room. Trevor landed in Italy on Saturday morning and walked into the Bellini office carrying 2 things he trusted too much. A revised draft and the confidence of people who had never had to earn that room. The meeting still happened. That was the part Celeste would later treat as proof she had been right. But it was no longer a signing conversation. It was a courtesy review. No warmth. No ease. No sense of a family preparing to close with people they trusted. Just polished distance. Enzo Bellini opened the folder, turned 2 pages, and looked at Trevor. Why was the previous lead removed at the final stage? Trevor gave him the answer headquarters had handed him. Internal restructuring. Enzo nodded once. Who changed this wording? A few updates were made in New York. And why? Enzo asked. Did New York believe it was wise to change both language and representation? This close to signature. Trevor kept his voice calm. That was his mistake. The calmer he sounded, the clearer it became that he knew the shape of the deal and not its history. He could explain process. He could not explain trust. Then he made it worse. He told them Belmar wanted a cleaner authority structure going forward. Enzo closed the folder. Cleaner for whom? He asked. No one raised a voice. That would have been easier. The room just cooled by another degree. At the end, Enzo said, we will keep Monday on the calendar, but before anything is signed, we will review whether your company still understands who is authorized to speak with us. That line should have frightened someone in New York. It did not. Back in the city, Celeste and Graham still attended the weekend fashion show. Graham thought there had been a staffing adjustment. Celeste texted to Trevor that night, "Good. Keep them moving." She took the meeting silence as proof she had one, which told you exactly how little she understood that room. By Sunday night, Monday was still on the calendar. That was why they kept smiling. They mistook delay for safety, politeness for trust, and a quiet room for control. Monday did not begin with shouting. That was the first thing that made it dangerous, and no one stormed into a conference room. No one slammed a fist on a table. There was just a message waiting before the office had fully settled into itself. Quiet enough to be overlooked by anyone still pretending the weekend had solved something. Trevor saw it first. The Bellini family would not proceed to signing. Instead, they sent a formal hold notice. Short, precise, cold. 3 reasons, written cleanly enough to leave no room to hide the lead negotiator, had been removed at the final stage. Material language had been changed without continuity. And Belmar's authority structure now required review before any agreement could be signed. Trevor called headquarters, sounding calm in the way men do when panic has only just started rising. By the time Julian, Legal, and Graham were pulled in, the problem had already changed shape. This was no longer a difficult supplier or a personality conflict overseas. It was an external partner formally questioning how Belmar made decisions under pressure. That was when Graham finally saw it. I had not been moved off a trip. I had been pulled out of a live cross-border deal at the exact point where trust mattered more than paper. The wording had not been cleaned up. It had been altered for optics. And Bellini had read the entire sequence the way serious people always do, not as confusion, but as a warning. Celeste still tried to wave it away. She made them too dependent on her. She said, "This is an overreaction." Legal shut that down. Then this was not management. One of the attorneys said, it was reckless interference in a live external deal. That was the line that changed the room. Then merchandising asked for an updated timeline. Planning wanted to know how much room was left before the season slipped. Before noon, a major buyer requested a readiness update. Now the damage had a clock. The office opened that morning expecting an ordinary week. What arrived instead was the first cold proof that Celeste had not removed a problem. She had exposed one. By Monday afternoon, the mood in the building had changed from irritated to careful. That is what happens when people realize a bad decision may have left a record. Legal did not come in like detectives. They were quieter than that. Slower, more precise. They asked for the weekend email chain, the draft history, the approval trail behind my removal, and every internal message tied to the revised version Trevor had carried into Italy. By evening, they had enough. Not enough to call it a lawsuit. Not enough to use the kind of language that reaches the full board in one jump, but enough to change the air on the executive floor. Celeste had been careful. That was the problem. She had not written anything obviously reckless. She stayed just inside the line where powerful people think they are safe. Marina is becoming difficult. She needs a reminder. The deal has to move without increasing her leverage. We need wording that aligns with Monday optics. One sentence like that can be dismissed. 4 cannot. Together, they told a clean story. This had not been an operating decision. It had been shaped by ego, optics, and a woman with informal power who mistook access for authority. Graham read the chain in silence. Then Legal said the sentence no one in that room could soften. This was not a staffing correction. It was undocumented family interference inside a live external negotiation. No one answered. That was the moment Julian stopped looking like a man who had helped with logistics. He had approved a power move and called it continuity. Nadia looked worse. HR had not simply processed the change. It had wrapped executive impulse in procedural language and sent it across an ocean. This is not a lawsuit, Legal added. Not yet, but it is a governance exposure. Celeste had wanted to teach me my place. By Monday night, her own emails had defined the problem for everyone else. By Tuesday, they were trying to rebuild the deal from my files. That was the first real sign they had stopped pretending this was just a personnel issue. Sourcing pulled everything I had touched. Drafts, margin notes, delivery windows, side comments buried in email threads, on paper. It looked reassuringly organized, searchable, transferable. The kind of record executives like to wave around when they want to believe no one is truly necessary. But the files did not show negotiation sequence, settled pressure points, or where trust had already been damaged. They did not show which concession Bellini would not make twice, which brother went quiet when he felt pushed, or which phrase from New York had nearly poisoned the room 2 months earlier. Trevor tried to compensate with confidence. That was his mistake. On Tuesday afternoon, he sent Bellini a clarification memo meant to reassure them that Belmar's authority chain was now streamlined for efficiency. He copied Graham. He copied legal. And because Celeste wanted visibility, he copied her, too. Enzo replied 23 minutes later. We do not sign supplier agreements through family visibility. Please confirm in writing who actually holds decision authority on your side. That email moved faster through Belmar than panic ever could. By then, merchandising wanted a revised timeline. Planning wanted to know how much room remained before the season slipped. Finance had started modeling delay exposure. What had been humiliation on Thursday was now cost by Tuesday. Inside Belmar, the story had changed. This was no longer about a director being handled. It was about who had taken a live external relationship and turned it into a display of internal power. What I had been holding for them was never a file. It was the part of the deal that only became visible once it stopped protecting them from the consequences. By Tuesday afternoon, the meetings had multiplied. Legal took one room, operations another, and finance joined the moment delay started carrying numbers. By Wednesday morning, people who had not cared about supplier relationships a week earlier were speaking carefully about exposure, timing, and buyer confidence. Legal was the first group to stop using soft language. This is not a supplier tantrum. One of the attorneys said, this is a continuity failure with a documented interference trail. That changed the room. Graham could no longer pretend his wife had simply mishandled a difficult employee. He was being forced to look at what it had become, a governance risk created by informal family influence. Poor judgment, and a sequence of messages no one could defend cleanly. Celeste still tried. She made them too dependent on her, she said. That was the real mistake. The answer came back fast. If the company allowed a relationship that critical to rest on one lead, Legal said, then removing that lead in the final stage for image reasons was even more irresponsible. No one spoke after that. Nadia was asked why HR had processed the change without flagging continuity risk. Julian was asked why operations had approved replacement coverage without insisting on a pause. Neither answer improved when said out loud. By Wednesday afternoon, the board's risk oversight group had been briefed. Not the full board, but not yet. But high enough to change posture, tone, and who was suddenly excluded from certain rooms. And still, no one had called me not until late Wednesday, when Legal finally reached out. They did not ask me to save them by Yule. They did not offer a decorative apology. They asked what had actually been handed off and what had not, and what part of the damage was still reparable. That was when I paid attention. For the first time since Celeste's call, someone inside Belmar was no longer asking how to manage me. They were asking what it would cost to put the deal back under someone who actually understood it. By Thursday, they had stopped speaking to me like I was a problem. Now I was a condition. Legal set up the call, Bellini on one side, Belmar on the other, me in the middle, but not in the old role. Not as the woman expected to absorb pressure and make everyone else look competent. This time, I named terms before I agreed to speak substantively. Celeste would be removed from all supplier communication. No side messages. No visibility copies. No last-minute edits dressed up as executive input. The deal would revert to the last clean draft attached to my Friday record email. If Belmar wanted me back in the process, my authority had to be restored in writing before the call ended. No one would speak to Bellini in Belmar's name unless that authority appeared on the record. And HR and operations would build a continuity protocol for key international negotiations so no one could ever again treat a live external relationship like a staffing slot with a password. No one argued. They were out of better options. The Bellinis did not sign that day. I not have trusted them if they had. But Enzo agreed to reopen the review path once Belmar sent a corrected authority chain with my name restored as lead. That was the real reversal. Inside Belmar, the consequences landed where they belonged. Celeste was removed from supplier matters entirely. Nadia received a formal warning. Julian lost unilateral authority over replacement moves in continuity-sensitive deals. And Graham had to say out loud what men like him usually spend years avoiding. Family interference had put the business at risk. I did not step back into my old position. I stepped into a stronger one. They once thought I needed to be taught my place. What changed instead was how far their power was allowed to reach. By the end of the week, the Bellini deal had not magically healed. Real damage never does. But it reopened under cleaner terms, written authority, and a structure no one could tamper with over a weekend phone call. That was enough for me. Belmar gave me a choice: stay with formal authority and compensation that matched the work I had been carrying. Or leave after a paid transition and let them absorb the cost of what they had almost broken. For the first time in years, the decision was mine. I stayed. Not for Celeste. Not for Graham. And not because the building had suddenly learned humility. I stayed because the terms had changed. When the revised authority memo went out, my name sat where it should have been all along. Lead negotiator. Final commercial continuity review. No supplier side revisions without my written approval. Celeste was still in the building. But when the next Bellini call began, she was not on it. That was the trophy. No speech. No revenge fantasy. Just a silent exclusion written into process. Where ego could no longer override the work. Graham kept his company. But he lost the luxury of pretending family power lived outside business consequences. And I stopped confusing endurance with safety. Some people do not break you in one dramatic moment. They keep testing how much disrespect you will normalize until the system finally shows its seams. They thought they had removed one difficult woman from a deal. What they removed was the last person still keeping the damage contained.